All right, it's my second attempt at making a video. Hopefully the sound is fixed because I actually got my headset working again. I'm not sure what had happened to it, but there's my boy. Anyhow, so I managed to play in the 1v1 tournament this weekend. That's the second time I've played Breya in quite some time, and I'm actually really liking this deck more and more. I went 4-2, which was the bottom four of the top eight were 4-2, but I didn't make the cut. However, I wasn't playing this version exactly as you see it here. I had some clunky cards in here, and the number one card that was actually surprising to me to realize it needed to go, and it was a suggestion by Brian that actually triggered me to realize he was right, was a Yawgmoth's Will. It's actually terrible in this format when you don't have when you're not playing a deck packed with a bunch of 0 and 1 mana artifacts that produce obscene amounts of mana. Yawgmoth's Will loses a ton of value. So I took that out, and the other thing that I was using in the tournament, there were a couple of other things I was using in the tournament that didn't make as much sense as well. So basically, like, I had Trinket Mage and some other stuff. Not necessary. I love Trinket Mage. It's great when you go get Skull Clamp or Map for Throne of the High City, but to refill your hand. But it's totally unnecessary, and it's also way too slow against vampires. So vampires was my problem in the tournament. Afterwards, however, I reconfigured the deck to address the vampire threat. And I just wanted to quickly touch on some of those changes. The deck now has Zealous Persecution, which is an amazing card. I am very impressed by it, at least at this time. Works extremely well with Mentor and Bitter Blossom Breya tokens, but also just it's an incredible 2-mana sweeper that you can fetch with Muddle the Mixture, which is really nice, or you can Mystical Teachings into. And along the lines of instants that you can Teachings into, there's also Fire Covenant is in here as well. And I also have Electrolyze in here, which is interesting, but actually has been proven pretty good. And as far as Electrolyze and Fire Covenant both go, one trick that came up during my testing, and I had kind of realized it was an option, but had shelved the idea until it actually happened, was that if you ultimate these cards, Electrolyze, Fire Covenant, and Fire Ice, either side, work extremely well with Dak Faden's ultimate. So in one game, I actually ultimate Dak Faden, and I'm going to try, hopefully you'll see it, but I Fire Covenant all my opponent's creatures for 1, and at the end of my opponent's turn, I basically gain control of his entire board as an instant, and the effect would need to be stifled to be stopped. And so it's nearly impossible to stop. Everything with 1 toughness, of course, would die in that scenario, but everything else becomes yours, takes a point of damage, and moves over to your side because you targeted it after ultimating Dak Faden. Electrolyze does the same thing, but only to 2 targets. Fire does the same thing, or Ice if it's a big thing. It's kind of an amazing synergy there. So I really like that. The other thing that's in here that was not in here before is Mystic Confluence, and that's been proving to be exceptional as well. Just because this is kind of like one of your end game victory conditions, and works. You can play like a back and forth early game where you're just kind of both struggling and you end up with parity, and then a single play of Mystic Confluence can sometimes be such a swing in cards and tempo that you just win the game. It's also, and as far as cards and tempo goes, it curves really nice with Tezzeret, where you can go Confluence. They take their turn, you counter their play, bounce 2 of their guys, don't draw a card, untap, cast Tezzeret, go get Aura, block the game out immediately. It also works, of course, as a counter, draw 2, so basically a souped up cryptic command, etc., etc. So it's just a very, very, very good card in here, because the deck is so tempo oriented as a top end card draw, secondary Factor Fiction or cryptic command when you need it. So very nice card. Anyway, Kaya has been insane. Like, just an incredible Jam Day Tome / Disrupting Scepter on 1 card. It's been super, super good. There is a trick with Kaya that you can actually blink out your Breya. Make sure you tell it to go to exile, not the command zone, but you can blink out your own Breya and then collect 2 additional birds when it comes back into play, or blink it out and then deluge, for example. But in general, you're basically just using it as a stick slash book simultaneously. Nahiri's been very, very good. It's one of the best disenchants in the format, basically. That's what it generally functions as, and of course as removal for creatures as well. The deck's just been playing marvelously. One other thing that I've changed in here as well, one of the cards that you might notice is missing is Grim Monolith. So Grim Monolith, just because this deck cannot be built under the assumption that you're going to have, gobs of colorless mana, because you generally won't. So Grim Monolith, even when you get it, it often doesn't have anything to do, because you're looking at it like, well, I mean, sure, it's great when you pump it into a Fact or Fiction or a Tezzeret or something, Mystic Confluence a few turns earlier, or whatever, maybe a big Whir. But outside of like your handful of endgame cards, like a lot of this stuff here can't really leverage it very well. And I was actually struggling occasionally with mana, just hitting land drops on time, despite all the cards in here that assist with that. So I ended up just going ahead and add an additional land. Throne of the High Cities in here over City of Traders, because again, we're not as worried about turboing into colorless drops and doing, it was fancy tricks with pickup lands and City of Traders, but Throne of the High City is totally insane. It feels like playing Library of Alexandria in a format where nobody else has Library of Alexandria. It's so insanely good, and because it's so good and easier to fetch than I had, Palace Jailer in here to get Monarch, I actually was able to take the Palace Jailer out. Jailer was a way to answer Emrakul's back in the days when people were cheating those into play, but now that that's really not a thing, it's not nowhere near as important as it used to be. And Throne of the High City does exactly what you wanted a Jailer to do, only a million times better. It can't be countered. You can do it as an instant. It's fetchable with Map. It's just or Wayfarer. It's just an incredible card. The other card that's in here is Reflecting Pool. So I could have gone with a 4th island, but I think I like the Reflecting Pool better. I still have land tax, because tax for multiple lands is just really, really good, especially since they're islands and you've got Shackles in the deck. But I also do not have Scroll Rack. Scroll Rack was too slow. It was just there's no time for that. Zealous Persecution can actually win a game. Scroll Rack is the card you'll have in play when you lose a game often. So it just didn't make any sense, and that's how I managed to fit in some of these other cards, by cutting old staples that are much, much better in multiplayer than they are in where you've got an entirely different paradigm as far as how your game develops than they are in 1v1, where you're really playing tight and focusing on just value plays early, lots of that, and then you hunker down behind various counters and removal, and just make it impossible for your opponent to crawl back into the game. So anyway, with all that said, let's check out some games, and I'm going to actually show you the. Let's see if we can get in the game history. Sorry, I got a text message that distracted me slightly. Anyway, so you can see I did as much testing as I could prior to the event, trying to tune, but I really didn't get enough testing against really high quality decks, and then so I went in and I went 4-2, an early loss to Vampires, a win, a loss to in this game here. So this was Vampires just flooding the board, and I just didn't have anything. I had a bunch of clunky cards. I won there, and in this one I didn't draw a land for 13 turns. I didn't draw a land, and all I needed was a second land to win that game, because I had my opponent under a Winter Orb. So 13 turns I had my opponent under an orb. A second land would have got me a Signet, which would have got me off to the races, or basically anything. I just was so mana screwed. It was the worst mana screw I think I've had that I can even remember having gotten. Worse than, I don't know. It was insane. How do you draw 13 cards straight with no lands? Anyway, after that was one of the reasons why I did add a 33rd land, though. And then I went ahead and won the next 3. But okay, so let's take a look at some games. You can see I'm testing here, I'm making adjustments, testing, making some tweaks, and then right about somewhere around here, if you look back, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So roughly after the tournament here, it was about 23 and, well, yeah, Doesn't that's counting of all time. Anyway, it was about 23 and 2 or 23 and 22 and 3 somewhere on there. Was that 2 losses? 1 2. Yeah. So about 23 wins and 2 losses was the average. So the the winning ratio is starting to feel like it's supposed to, um, and on top of that, I think that again these losses were like with a slightly inferior build. So what I want to do is I'm going to start with the superior build, which starts somewhere around here. Yeah, you can see there's like a 15-minute, 20-minute pause as I'm making more adjustments. I come back into it, and then very good things happen. So this should be the build as it is, or maybe it kicked in a few turns later, but we'll take a look and we'll see. Now, the one thing that I had different for a few of these games was that I had Engineered Plague and I had Lingering Souls, and I realized that was just a little bit over the top, overreaction to vampires. So I replaced them with the Electrolyze and the Sword of Fire and Ice, and those are excellent cards that are good against vampires still, but also good against control and pretty much anybody. Whereas the Lingering Souls, Engineered Plague was a super narrow solution. Okay, well I guess this guy didn't play, so we'll just move on to the next one. But I haven't actually reviewed these, so hopefully we don't have too many interferences. You know, too many of that bad games and broken, Magic Online doing what it typically does. But so yeah, here my opponent had to mulligan a bunch, and he's playing Carador, and I've got early Sylvan Library Defense, which is pretty much one of the only ways, Sylvan or a Dark Confidant being one of the only ways he could recover. I top deck Thoughtseize. My opponent misses a land drop. This is going to be a quick game, and then we'll move on to the next one, because this doesn't appear to be much going on here. And look at that, he is holding the Sylvan. So I take his Arbor Elf, leaving the Sylvan so that I can snare it, and he just scoops right there on the spot. Had he not, of course, I get to go land into Strix, pick up a card, and then quickly I can either play the Throne of the High City, which is a Howling Mine for me only, or I most likely would probably develop Breya and then get the Throne down, make sure that there's no way that my opponent could possibly deal with it, turn on my Mox Opal, and sit on my Snare. Obviously not much of a game there, though. Anyway, Moving Help here is playing Ida Mulligan, so he's playing the Scarab God. I don't remember for sure which, excuse me, I don't remember for sure how these games played out, but I'll do my best to walk you through. Oh, I do remember this one a bit, though. This was actually fairly funny. So my opponent plays Islands. We'll check that off. Take a Zombie Master out of his hand. So it looks like he's playing some kind of zombie theme deck rather than using the Scarab God as just support for like a pure control strategy. He obviously top decked the Jace, and I don't want it on the board. It's a little early to, like I don't have, it'd be a few turns before I could kill it. By then it would flip and just be a pain. So I'm going to get rid of it, and then I'm trusting that he doesn't draw like Ancient Tomb here, or that if he does, I can deal with it. And I go ahead and play Dak, because I'd much rather have the card selection that it provides. And one of the cards that I was looking for was a solution to that thing, and fortunately I do find it. So I end up having to throw a Skull Clamp away here, but here you can see this is a great example of what Mystic Confluence does in these games. You can see, so now he's played all the cards that I know about. I'm going to counter his Scarab God here. Now all I have to do is find a land, and I go from I'm out of gas to perfect rebuild, and look at that. All right, so for his turn, he plays a Cemetery Reaper, which I am fine with. And because I'm not as... I could counter that and then draw, but I'd rather just draw 3 cards. I think a random card on my side is better than whatever that might potentially do. All right, so this time I'm able to Thoughtseize my opponent here. And I take Endless Ranks out of his hand, which is some sort of recurring zombie-producing enchantment. I figured I didn't want to deal with that, leaving him with Wonder and Toxic Deluge. I go ahead and Dak away Kaya there and keep Fiery Covenant. And so the reason I've done this is because I'm able to take control of his Reaper, and then with Fiery Covenant and Dak Faden, well, I already kind of blew it by explaining exactly how that works earlier. But the game plan is this is all a big setup here. So, and he plays the Sidisi, the zombie Naga, and a Wonder. So I'm obviously going to let him have the Wonder and make myself a zombie. All right, so I'm just plussing up Dak, continuing to. I'm trying to get him to actually play as Scarab God is what I want. But on the other hand, if I can just deploy a million things on the board and sit behind a muddle, I guess that's fine too. I throw away an island and a Griv Lava Mancer there. I'm planning to exile that Wonder in short order. Of course, we knew he had the Toxic Deluge, so I go ahead and counter that. And now the coast is clear to just, yeah, completely control the board. I go ahead and use Dak's ultimate here because I'm not willing to. Any two cards I draw are almost certainly worse than the two cards in my hand, so it makes no sense to draw. And I'm planning to use his ultimate eventually anyway, so I go ahead and do that. I'm going to activate this guy in just a moment, but my opponent is going to return all zombie creature cards to play. So the first thing I'm going to do is take his Wonder, turn it into a zombie. He kills all the humans and gets a bunch of zombies. It looks like it should be good here, but we're going to go ahead and Fire Covenant each one of those for one and move those over to my side of the board. Now that was a mistake. I should have actually targeted each of those plus the creature I stole. That way I could untap Vidalcan Shackles. However, my opponent's at -14, so I'll live with the air. And yeah, that's an incredible, like, as you can see, Fire Covenant Dak Faden is just an incredible synergy, especially in a format where that's based on creatures. And of course, you can do the same as I was mentioning earlier with Fire Ice or Electrolyze. All right, so in this next game here, my opponent is playing Nin the Pain Artist. And actually, I feel like I probably have already won because, I mean, how is Nin the Pain Artist going to do against, first of all, Weathered Wayfarer, a really good start with development and tons of removal plus cheap counters. It's not looking good for Nin, but it's looking even worse when he develops the way that he does there. It's not like I decided that the situation looks so bad that I'm actually willing to go ahead and tap out one more time. Trying to get him to get his Nin on the board. I go ahead and Wayfarer at the end of his turn, and then he has a Izzet Static Caster that he can play in response, killing my Wayfarer. But I do get to use it at least once, which still, I mean, I'm not up a card per se because he's got that creature in play, but I'm in a good spot. So I'm going to go ahead and just, I decide I'd rather keep my Strix for whatever reason, mainly because I might draw equipment. So I go ahead and kill his Static Caster, and I can deal with Nin later. However, this is a decision I regret because he ramps out into a Lotus Voltaic Key Azami, and I'm having to use more and more removal, which means I'm not saving it for Nin. Plus, he's way ahead on mana because of the key. So anyway, he goes for an Archivist, which I remand, and then goes for it again, which I mana leak. And he has a counter, I believe. Yeah. He has, oh, Dramatic Reversal, which he uses to untap his mana and pay for the mana leak. It was actually kind of a dramatic way to reverse my play. Anyway, so he plays Nin, and this is actually not looking too great. So I go ahead and Cryptic his Gilded Lotus and play a Winter Orb to take some of the power out of Nin. He draws a card with Archivist. I now have got my Nahiri, and I'm able to just exile the Archivist. And now I'm really glad that I kept the Baleful Strix around because, as you can see, it's holding the board against Nin, sort of. I go ahead and Merchant Scroll and get Whir. I do have to watch my life total a little bit, but it's not too bad, especially because I'm planning to do this and Whir into Jitte, which I can use to control Nin indefinitely. Top deck a Dak Faden, which is amazing. Of course, I'm going to try to equip Jitte here, and I assume he's going to shoot and give me a card, which is fine. That's to be expected because it allows me to exile his other mana rock and steal, exile one and steal the other. So at this point he has no mana, and I get to play Dark Confidant, play a Stoneforge, and so there's no way for him to work under the orb, and I don't have to worry about him drawing Gilded Lotus. With Stoneforge I get Sword of Feast and Famine. With Jitte I remove Nin, and at this point it's just elementary. I've got Snapcaster to counterspell, and we're using Dak yet again to craft the old hand here. And here he's transforming lands into spells. Go ahead and play Sword of Feast and Famine, smash in, untap all my lands under the orb, cast my commander for the first time this game. And I'm sitting with, I assume I'm playing my commander here. Well, bottom line is, I don't know, we might bug out here. Yeah, is this gonna work? Yeah, I think it's probably a bugged game, but as you can see, the game is over, and as my opponent could see as well. So he just goes ahead and scoops it up. So, and we'll move on to the next game. So that was Squish Love. Next one's Steel Dangerous. I do also like the there's also a, you don't see it too often. You used to see Dark Steel Ingot a lot. Don't see it too often anymore these days, but that's another really good thing that you can do with Dak Faden. Besides just taking it, is if you've used your ultimate up and he's not on the board, you can just target it and take it because it's indestructible as well. All right, so my opponent is playing. So Steel Dangerous here is playing some sort of Endrick Sar rat-based deck, Thrall-based deck. Yeah, it plays a Thrall Parasite. So I do have to kind of watch it because it can mess with my guys, but it can only do what attacking for one could do anyway. So I don't even. It just doesn't seem good at all. He does get a Skull Clamp down, of course, but what I decided is that he can have a few cards because I'm going to make up for that and more with Kaya. And then in thinking about it, you know what? I can actually tempo him with swords, so I decided I'm going to do that with the construct on the board and Kaya in my hand. I'm just going to start raking him over the coals with the Disrupting Scepter and Jamday Tome that costs 0. But he has a Madness creature, so it was only a Jamday Tome. We'll go ahead and kill that Madness creature with the Ready and Pass. Only a Jamday Tome. Kind of awesome. So he Diabolic Tutors, which is just not a demonic tutor, and it means I have tons of time here. Go ahead and plus into more cards, make a creature, and because I have Mystical Teachings, I'm not going to deploy Jace here. I'm just going to sit back on a nice defensive position. He plays Carnival of Souls, which will give him mana and cost him life whenever a creature comes down, but I'm kind of not really intending for him to get a creature into play. So at the end of his turn, because Spell Pierce will handle anything he might do, I'm going to go ahead and play a tapped land and then Mystical Teachings for a Confluence. Yet again, Confluence showing up as my late game card, just being awesome. Kaya goes ahead and exiles herself. I destroy Clamp so that I don't have to sweat it. Play a land and pass, and at this point, as you can see, it's Confluence. Just if you're ahead, it's just a game-ending bomb. Like how do you deal with this? And the other thing that's crazy about Confluence in this deck, though, is so Jace. This is a combo where, for the most part, when you flip Baby Jace, you know, JVP, you're not getting value from your counter spells. I mean, you can target them and then cast a spell, and your opponent can't really effectively counter on your turn. If you want to waste using, I don't know, waste, but if you want to do that, you lose loyalty and you probably get nothing. However, with this counter spell, much like Cryptic, you can counter on the way down and then draw on the way up, or generally speaking, counter and draw on the way down and then draw on the way up. So this thing turns this counter spell into a draw 3 a second time, which is just really, really, really. I mean, the first time it's probably game over. The second time it had better be game over. Like if you can't win after drawing 6 cards, you've done something monumentally wrong, or something's gone monumentally wrong at the very least. Anyway, so for this game here, I'm playing against Jinora, a commander I do not see very much, but certainly has the potential. It's a very aggressive commander. I'm going to develop early. My opponent, and I'm glad that I did, because my opponent's got a Knight of the Reliquary, which I need to get off the board as fast as I can before it grows so high that Breya can't deal with it. It's already a 4/4 and could have been a 5/5 right there, but my opponent could not quite get there. He got to 4/4, and as a result decides that he's going to scoop. He gets a Ramanap Excavator. He's got his Knight, but at this point I can play a land, play an artifact mana, and then sack 2 Thopters, Breya, and an artifact mana, and kill the 2 big threats over there after attacking with Breya, of course. And I think from there, then I get to just play. Then I get to redeploy Breya in short order, or if not, then refill my hand very quickly. And I suppose that was a reason for this opponent to scoop. Although I thought that was premature. Like I hadn't completely turned the corner. I didn't have, I wasn't doing things while in control of the game. I was getting there. Um, I was still busy undoing what my opponent had done to try to win the game, and hadn't gotten to the point where I was busy undoing his plays rather than doing my plays, so I hadn't quite got to that point yet. Anyway, next game is against Karlov, and this is definitely a creature to respect and watch out for. Another reason why I actually like having more bounce is these types of high investment commanders, as a matter of fact. So I thought about dazing the Signet here, but it just seemed like a really bad early decision. Say I do this, I leave Grim untapped so that he can't really effectively get his commander out, I didn't think. But then he plows and I'm like, oh, well, why didn't I leave swords untapped? He goes for a burnished heart, and I really don't actually want my opponent to have 2 extra mana. So I'll go ahead and daze it, because if I do let my opponent have 2 extra mana, then daze becomes, that much harder to use. And here I have to get the Tundra down so that I can Swords to Plowshares Karlov before it gets too crazy. What plays a Suture Priest, which is going to give him a life whenever he puts a creature into play. And I decide that I'm going to actually plow the commander rather than the priest. And the reason is that I actually really don't want to Swords a 1/1, despite the fact that it's a bit of an enabler. I just want to get this commander to be so expensive that I just don't have to worry about it again. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and set up for Breya next turn. And I get punished pretty hard here by Vindicate. So I'm set back. My opponent misses an attack. It doesn't matter in this game, as it turns out. And I top deck a Night's Whisper. So I get to draw a few cards, but I'm really set back on tempo. So now he can play his 4/4 commander if he wants to, but he opts not to do that and instead plays a Guild of Lows, which I think is probably very sensible. It means he's going to be able to play his commander and then again and then again, and I can do very little about that. So I am really behind on tempo, like just massively behind, as you can see. But I get to bluff a counter here, and I have a play. He plays a Well of Lost Dreams, so I'm extremely nervous now. And then he inexplicably plays his Karlov without mana to actually use his Well. So he does get a bigger commander, but I'm happy that he doesn't get to draw cards, especially considering he has only 2 cards in hand. So I'm going to whir where X is 0 at the end of my opponent's turn, because I've got to develop, get a Mox Diamond, and because my opponent's got a 4/4 over there, I can play Breya and just immediately get that thing off the board. So the Suture Priest is going to do a lot of damage to me here. So I'm going to wait, though. I can kill this thing in response to the triggered ability, so I kind of want to wait and see what happens, and I'm rewarded for that because my opponent plays a Return to Dust, which allows me to actually sack the 2 things he targets to kill it, rather than I could have killed the Thopters and then I would have lost. I really would have been in big trouble if I had made that play. So because of the way that my opponent's mana works out, he can't replay his commander immediately, and so I'm in good shape here. Because now I've got, again, I've gotten to my end game card, Mystic Confluence. My opponent just fetched a card, but he does have plenty of mana to use it. But whatever it is, well, it can't be the Ingot, so it's got to be the last thing in his hand, and it's Kaya. So unfortunately, he's got exactly 3 mana left. So since I don't want to Confluence and just make him pay 3 twice and then draw 1 card, I decide I'm going to Teachings a counterspell up and save Confluence for another day. I prefer to counter draw, but I'm also realizing that there's a chance that I'll need the Confluence for bouncing his commander if it gets out of hand. So I would rather just wait and then use a Skull Clamp to dig a little bit further. I should not have tapped my Ancient Tomb here, by the way. That was clearly a misplay there. Turns out not to matter, I don't think, because I think I'm going to spend the Confluence this turn, but still, it was early. All right, so I've got to make his commander more expensive. That was the game plan from the outset. So hopefully he doesn't have a creature and enough mana left over to gain life and draw off the well. He does not. He still hasn't drawn off the well, which is fantastic. He's got exactly one card in hand, so I'm going to try to... Yes, I'm going to try to develop, and swing in and take that card out of his hand. Get all of my mana back. And it turns out it was just a Plains, I believe. Yeah. Get all of my mana back. And now I have Mystical Teachings up, but I also have Breya. And I really want Suture Priest off the board. And it appears we're going to bug out. Is that right? Yep. But actually what happened was I killed the priest right away. And that way, or I prepped to kill the priest just like I did before. And he tries to play his commander. He does. I kill the priest in response. I'm able to get Strix going and, again, strip out his hand. My opponent really never got to use the well, which was huge for me, and the game ends. He scoops it up at that point because he's got... he's just facing down, no way to get anything in play or do anything that he's trying to do. And his hand's getting emptied on top of that. I'm getting double mana. Plus... okay, so I still had Plague in at this point. This is electrolyzed. Plague is electrolyzed and or a sword. Sword of Fire and Ice, and then electrolyze was replacing the Lingering Souls. All right, there we go. So as you can see, I drew the Plague and I was like, whoops, and then we fixed it. So I get a great start here. I get to first turn Thoughtseize my opponent against a Rashmi player. And I see a very, very strong hand against me. Slice and Twain, Maul Drifter, plays a forest. Riftwing Cloudskate, so he's got Artifact Kill that draws him a card. I have to get Rashmi off the board right away. If you're not familiar, Rashmi is a major problem there. But unfortunately, this sets me up for a punishing playback, which is that. However, I kind of wanted the creature out so I could electrolyze it and gone. My opponent also, I wanted to encourage my opponent to do exactly what he just did, Slice and Twain and draw a card. I'm totally fine with that because I needed Slice and Twain gone because I was planning to Merchant Scroll and go get Winter Orb and set him up. And unfortunately, so everything I was doing went according to plan, except for this Green Warden of Murasa that he gets. So now I'm set back a little bit, and my opponent, I can't remember what he picked up. Oh, he's picked up Slice and Twain. Surprisingly, though, he doesn't slice, he just sends in. So he does get a pick up on Maul Drifter again, but I mean, who cares? That's not what this game's actually about. What this game is about is Jitte and Winter Orb. Alright, so I'm able to kill his Maul Drifter, and I'm sitting on a Muddle the Mixture. I know he's got a Slice and Twain. He had suspended, if you're wondering what the last 2 mana was, Riftwing Cloudskate. Plays a Wood Elf. I'm waiting for him to slice. Instead, he surprises me with Acidic Slime and decides he's going to pressure my mana instead of killing a Jitte. And he's a green player. I think that's absolutely nuts. Despite having Slice and Twain in hand, I think that's super greedy. He's been trying to crush my mana this whole time, and it's just not working for him. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and whir here, setting him up, as you can see, with a Remand. But also, I had to do it this way because of the way that the colored mana worked out. I needed to be able to leave 2 mana up. I could not use the Signet there. But now that I've got this set up, all I have to do is just take a little damage, and I can go ahead and get that Jitte rocking and take over this game. I've got Muddle for Slice and Twain. I've got Remand for his Cloudskate, which I was expecting. And if he had fought over the Cloudskate, of course, I just pick up the Orb and replay it. If he picks up the Jitte, then I just kill his guys. Of course, right now, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not killing Wood Elf because I want to keep at least 1 counter on Jitte so I can kill Rashmi after an attack step. So I'm resetting my throne so that next turn I can actually play it and use it. I know my opponent's got... Now I can go ahead and kill his Wood Elves just so he doesn't have a creature in play that... He might have something like Court of Calling, so I do want it dead. I just wanted to make sure I had at least three counters on it. All right, end step. I'm going to go ahead and become the Monarch. I did it on my opponent's turn because I didn't feel like it was safe enough to use it any other time. With my triggered ability to draw on the stack, he tries to slice in twain, but I'm going to muddle it and then impulse. And at that point, my opponent's had enough. You get to play multiple Slice and Twains, Maul Drifters, pickups cards, and Acidic Slime, but he used them all to try to go after my mana. And despite the fact that he disrupted pickup mana, you know, my Daimir Aqueduct, he bounced it, then destroyed it. The deck is very, very, because the deck is now super tight on how it plays, due to the fact that you have to be in this format, and you can't assume a Soul Ring anymore. I was able to recover, as you could see, and then I actually felt really good about how that game played out, and then from there, you know, take over. But you got to see actually how insane Throne of the High City is, because if you notice, like this entire time we're fighting, we're now jockeying for, you know, it's a control battle. But while we're fighting this control battle with this kind of stall and delay tactics, I'm drawing 2 cards per turn, and I'm probably going to draw 2 cards per turn for the rest of that game. Like, it's highly unlikely that there's anything my opponent could have ever done until he got rid of the Jitse. And by then, I'm up to, like, Breya, and it just there's no coming back from that. That's assuming I drew no counters at all. All right, so in which case it would have been even harder. So I have to mulligan here, but I've got to keep. And here we are playing against Edgar Markov with the current build. So you get to see how good is it. So I'm going to go ahead and lead off with, I'd like both Wayfarer and Lavamancer, so I'm going to lead off with Lavamancer. That way if I need to force a will, I can then activate Lavamancer and kill something that might be a threat. My opponent plays just garbage, basically. The Vampire deck is really just, I have no regard for it at all. However, that said, you've got to be very cautious when playing against it. All right, so fortunately my opponent allowed me to go get another source of mana. I'm going to go get a Daimir Aqueduct and ensure that I can do it a 3rd time. Since I'm not going to be burning anything with Grim, I'll go ahead and swing in. Hopefully he doesn't play a Crusade effect here. He does not. He plays a Thrall that when it dies, he gets an Eldrazi spawn. And I rip Monastery Mentor. So I'm not going to get to Wayfarer or Grim, but I've got a protected Mentor here. And, I mean, what do you do if you're him? I mean, you have to try to kill it, right? But he doesn't have any way to do it because the deck is just, you know, 45 to 50 vampires. It's just kind of not great. So I get to Merchant Scroll into Fire Ice, which produces a monk and sets me up to, I can either Grim. I want to kill the Blood Artist so I don't lose tons of life when I'm killing his creatures. He goes for a Dusk Legion. And because it represents both a creature and a card, I'm going to go ahead and mana leak that and get another creature. By mana leaking it, I pump my guys, so he can't really effectively swing in here. I can trade the Monk token for his Skulk guy. The 3/3 will kill the 2/1. The 2/2 would kill one of his 1/1s. I'd take like a few points of damage. I'd lose some life to Blood Artist. I can still force a will here if I need to with either of these cards. And then on the next turn, I get to either Wayfarer or Grim or both, plus Fire Ice. I mean, the graveyard's building up, the Grim Lavamancer's threatening, the Monastery is growing. Like, this is how we beat the Vampire deck. And of course, I actually thought about there fetching, instead of Fire Ice, I actually thought about fetching Mystical Teachings so that I could go get Zealot, the Zealot card, and then just sweep his entire board. But I felt like Fire Ice was going to be acceptable since I was planning to play it that turn until he gave me a reason to mana leak. So here I am playing, and I'm playing against Edgar again, and look at this insane draw. Like, how is the Vampire deck going to beat this draw? This makes me very happy because, as I was saying before, Vampires was extremely, extremely difficult. Now, I made a very risky call here, and I actually fetched not white early, but the reason I did it was because I had both Strix and Dak Faden to draw cards later, and figured I'd be fine. My opponent actually has, he Stoneforges for a Skull Clamp, but he really doesn't have, like, he's not coming out the gates with a typical Vampire draw here, and you cannot give, like, you cannot give the Breya deck this much time, especially with the draw as good as the one that I have here, forward dealing with aggression. Just more, as you can see, like, the Vampire deck's just a lot of trash, more blood Blood Artists and garbage like that. I'm going to go ahead and trade off with a Mystic now because there's no point in not doing it when I have endless terrors here. Kill his Blood Artist right away just for tempo. Kill his, steal his Clamp, make a Construct and pass. And at this point, if my opponent doesn't scoop, I'll be shocked. All right, well, color me shocked. He gets to play some sort of 2/4 with an ability that doesn't matter because, of course, I've got Duretti. I go ahead and throw away a Confidant and a Merchant Scroll here so that I can play my commander and sit on a Spell Pierce with Painful Truce to refill. As I was saying before, like this deck, the way that it's configured now, you have so much, like, in abundance, like so much card draw. If you actually look at it, I threw away a Dark Confidant and a Merchant Scroll, both of which function as very good sources of cards. But despite that, I have a Skull Clamp. I can draw 2, 4, 6, potentially 8 cards next turn, plus a Painful Truce for, 11 cards, plus my draw step is 12, plus Dak Faden is 14. So literally, if I wanted to next turn, I could draw 14 extra cards. So yeah, I wasn't too worried about Confidant and Merchant Scroll. And that's just I really like the way that this works in terms of, like, what I'm talking about as far as, like, having that, like, amazing refill power just makes the deck so much stronger than I think it was initially, because initially I would have problems with my opponents, like duressing, for example, early on and stripping out all my options. But because there's just so many ways to draw cards, it's very difficult just to stop this deck from doing that. And playing like the 1-for-1 exchanges and running me out of cards, it just doesn't work that well. Anyway, my opponent's got a Karlov deck again, so I'm going to go ahead and disrupt a little bit because he didn't have a play on turn 1, so maybe he really needed that Caves. It's not like the kind of land that you generally, because Caves, if he had a tap land, I figured he'd lead with it. I wasn't anticipating Basilica, so it turns out that was probably an error. In a format where there isn't both Strip Mine and Wasteland, it's probably wise to be a little bit more protective of the Wastelands. But I was thinking that it would be fine given that I had Winter Orb. But as you can see, so my opponent Field of Ruins me his actually disruption was he actually chose the correct color there. I flipped some mana in response. But anyway, so what I was saying is that I probably should have sandbagged it a little bit, and then I would have been able to kill his Basilica and just beat him. So he's playing a bunch of cards that can't play cards from graveyards. I've taken my Yawgmoth's Will out. I don't care. Blind Obedience, Extort, Life Gain, Pristine Talisman, some more Life Gain, and some mana. Not worried about any of that too much. Tainted Sigil. I mean, I have to be cautious with Karlov, but not overly cautious. I'm going to go ahead and actually bounce his pickup land there for tempo. Play my Breya out, because even if he makes a giant Karlov here, it can't get all that big, and because he can't, the trigger on Blind Obedience happens when it's on the stack, so he couldn't use a Talisman, and as long as I'm careful not to sack my Marsh Flats before I Vedalken Shackles this guy, he can make it a 4/4 with Talisman, but he won't be able to sack the Tainted Sigil to gain life, because I won't have lost any life. So I'll take it, then use my Marsh Flats, and then from there, I think it's fairly trivial. Even if I screwed that up though somehow, I could just shrink it down with Breya. Breya loves Vedalken Shackles because you can just shrink creatures and then steal things that you have no business taking. So at that point, I think it was pretty firmly in the driver's seat there, and my opponent agreed, I guess. So he scooped it up and then just jumped back in a game with me to I don't know. Maybe he felt like that draw was a little bit poor on his side. Perhaps he has a little bit clunky, or who knows. So he wanted to play again. So anyway, I win the roll this time, and I've got a mulligan, but I mulligan. I put a land on top. It's just a very nice. I think, did I put it on top or did I put it on bottom? If I fetch here, I put it on the bottom. Okay, so I put it on the bottom. My opponent leads off with the Skull Clamp and an Urborg. So Urborg is great for me because of the way that my mana is developing. It allows me to actually not get a swamp here, and get all my colors on board, feeding off my opponent's Urborg so I can play my Bitter Blossom here, which Bitter Blossom Jitte is such a house against aggro because it's like infinite removal and infinite guys. All right, and the Fellwar Stone there was amazing timing. I'm going to leave the Marsh Flats in play because I'd really prefer to, like I'm not, I want to keep it in case I want to fetch a land tapped. Opponent does play a creature and clamps it, but with the Jitte on board, it's quite possible that he will not get to use clamp anymore. So I'm not like I don't like that, but I'm not like overly distraught by the occasion. All right, so send Jitte in now. Now I'm feeling pretty good because his Karlov is taken care of for the most part. I would very much like a counter or some way to refill my hand here, but with the way that this deck is built, I think I should find something like that fairly soon. Opponent goes for a 2/3 and a Lightning Greaves. So in response, I'm going to do 2 to the creature with fire and then shrink it. And Lightning Greaves is gone. Now this is actually not the best situation here. I'm going to go ahead and get to that tapped land I mentioned earlier. So this is not the best situation here because I am a little bit out of gas, but look at that. Right off the top. I actually didn't remember that that was going to happen. I just assumed that this deck is going to refill its hand pretty quickly because it does often, which I like. So I go for Breya here. So instead of actually taking the Painful Truce though, I realize I have tons of pressure on my opponent, and by playing Breya, I can assure that he can't get anything big enough to Greaves. And so I'll go ahead and gas up in a minute, but Breya is exactly what I want to see there. And now I mean, if you look at the clock that my opponent's under, it's devastating, right? So I also even, drew that disenchant there. So it's just going to get even worse for my opponent. I have Nahiri as well as the disenchant, but I think it's much wiser here to just chill on the Nahiri. Stand up the disenchant as well as a Breya activation. My opponent sweeps the board. I would go ahead and gain 5 life and destroy the most likely I don't know if I'd kill the Greaves or the Clamp, but I would certainly kill one of them. I think I'd actually kill the Greaves because that way I can just use Jitte to take over. If he swept the board, I gain 5 life. I kill Greaves. My guys all die. I get a fairy back, and then on my turn I get to play Nahiri, and then turn this land into something else. 6, 7, yeah, and then I've got a Jitte sitting there with fairy, and I can start beating in. So I mean, as you can see, like the modifications to the deck has made the aggro matches so much better than where it was before. And if you notice the pattern, almost all of my opponents are playing aggro. So what that effectively means is that the modifications have made all of my matches better. But the deck, of course, still does a very good job of playing control because of cards like Bitter Blossom, for example, Sword of Fire and Ice being an anti-aggro and anti-control card, and so on and so forth. All right, so my opponent gets a Riss out and a Scavenging Ooze, so this is his commander. I have a very kind of awkward draw, but I do have an early Bitter Blossom. My opponent plays a Clamp and decides he'd rather trade a Scavenging Ooze and 2 cards for a non-card on my side. So basically he traded a card for 2 cards. His Scavenging Ooze was just a very slow draw 2, 2 mana, 3 mana draw 2 is kind of bad. Anyway, on my turn I drew a Mentor, so I tapped out to play it. He didn't kill it, and that is going to allow me on the next turn to tithe into a ton of cards. I actually was thinking I was going to tithe again and realized that was probably unnecessary. I should get Shackles out and hold and hide the Sword of Fire and Ice. So I do that after combat, and I miss 2 points of damage as a result. Oops. Luckily, it just doesn't matter with Mentor and Bitter Blossom going, a Sword of Fire and Ice coming down. Like, this is just getting completely ridiculous at this point. This board state is like absolutely like, which one of us is the aggro player? As it turns out, I'm the control player, and I'm out aggroing the aggro player by a mile, by like leaps and bounds, right? So I play Sword here. I assume, I equip Sword on a flyer, right? I send in, kill the Lotus Cobra right away. Wasteland is white mana, pass for the turn. I'm sure he would, you can't really clamp Riz effectively at that point. My opponent's like maybe gets his fourth land down and does who knows what, but at that point I would have I would have I mean, well, I think the board state speaks for itself, but it's just a great board that feels excellent, and that's what I've been noticing with this deck. The games feel really good. They feel like it's doing what it's supposed to do. The aggro cards are are proving to be very very powerful in a format where nobody's got 4 mana on turn 2, and when you're not doing stuff like that, then suddenly cards like Bitter Blossom, which is like laughably slow in multiplayer, is incredibly strong, as you could see in 1v1. So yeah, any suggestions I'm certainly open to. Again, the major decks that I've seen has been Breya Mirrors, which I think I'm well positioned to deal with. Vampires, which so far so good, finally. Although I don't want to overly assume that I'm perfect against them, but it feels like I have a much better shot now than I did before. There's mono green land ramp slash just ramp in general, like ramp into Eldrazi. This deck is actually a little bit of a dog to that in some ways. Depends on what their draw and how much their draw and my draw line up. But they can sometimes just spew lands out so quickly and then naturally draw their big plays, and I'm sitting here trying to develop, and so I can lose those, especially if their big plays address like a Winter Orb, if I'm able to get the Orb out. On the other hand, sometimes they just dump their hand and have nothing. I counter one thing and then keep them locked out of the game for the rest of the time with just counter magic. So it really depends on how it goes, but that can be a little bit of a challenge. So suggestions for that I would think could be very helpful. And as far as the other big decks of the format, there's Teferi, which is a problem, but I think I'm pretty favored in. I played like quite a few games against Teferi, and all of them seem to go my way for a couple of different reasons. One is the cheap counters and disruption. Another is that a lot of stuff in here just the acceleration and the artifact removal. I've a lot of answers for artifacts in here. And then because I upped the counterspell count with the additional confluence, and because of course I have Pierce and Snare to go with everything else, it's been fairly good. The trick against Teferi in general is to try to get Breya on the table with 2 mana untapped, so that they can't just instantly combo you out with the Chain Veil, and then you never tap those 2 mana. It does not protect you against getting comboed out if they have like High Tide Teferi, because if they go High Tide Teferi, untap all their lands, and then you kill Teferi in response, and they're like, sure, Teferi's dead. Now I'll cast Teferi, untap all my lands again, and then they go off. So it can be a problem if they have High Tide, but I mean, everybody can win everything some way. So overall, though, it feels pretty good. And I think those are the big decks of the format. I think it's Teferi, Breya, Vampires, and Mono Green. I suppose there's also Partners, but Partners feels like a worse it's strange because Partners was absolutely horrible to face, but now that I have like a billion removal, it feels much stronger. Partners feels a lot weaker to me. It's easier to deal with than Vampires because their aggro's not as good. It's easier to deal with than Teferi because their control isn't as good, or Breya. But they can get the draw where they just steamroll you with either an early Sylvan Library. That card is just totally a nightmare in a 30 life format, which is part of the reason why I have so many different ways to try to not instantly lose to Sylvan. And then the other way they can do it is just sometimes they'll get like that early duress into a partner, into the right creature, and I just have nothing. But it's a lot more rare with this deck for that to happen. For me to just have nothing, no way to deal with a gray ogre, basically. So that's all I've got for now. I hope you enjoyed all this. I know there's a lot of blah blah blah, but I think that first of all, I'm very excited about this deck because it's actually really fun to play, and I'm surprised because I have not been able to say that 1v1 was fun to play for 6+ months. But I don't know if it's the combination of understanding the format better, or if it's the release of some more cards that function in control and have allowed the deck to actually play like a control deck again, such as Kaya, Nahiri, and so forth, or what. But I actually, it's just really an enjoyable deck to spin through. So if you're interested in the 1v1 format, I definitely recommend that you pick it up and give it a shot. Now, as far as people who are not interested in that format, I will show you where the current state of Breya is. But I think in my next video, I will probably play the multiplayer version of the multiplayer Breya, I mean. But you can see it's actually quite a different deck. Like, I do have Throne of the High City in here because Throne of the High City is legit, like, just Library of Alexandria in disguise. Totally insane levels of power. But having said that, the deck plays quite a bit differently. Has a lot more kind of combo-y elements. It's a little bit slower in terms of disruption, but a little bit better because it can go get silver bullets, and it can ramp out a lot faster. So this is the build. It eschews. I had at one time Vandal Blast and the red X spell that destroys X artifacts. I took out that card and just went with the setup that you see here, mainly because I actually included Monastery Mentor after having seen how nuts it is in 1v1. But basically, because you've got all the tutors, I think the one Vandal Blast is probably enough. So just a different format, different deck type. At the end of the day, this deck runs, what else? Urborg, that's different. Instead of Reflecting Pool, it runs Urborg for the Necropotents. It only runs 32 lands instead of 33, but, you know, one of the lands is Mishra's Workshop, and of course there's Strip Mine in here as well. Yeah, definitely a different thing, but same game plan, but much more focused on Winter Orb with this version, or Mind Twisting your opponent, rather than the 1v1 version, which plays, as you saw, just the 1v1 format. It's just all about killing creatures, so you just kill, and do it while drawing cards and counters, and man, it's fun. So hopefully you get a chance to play one or the other and you enjoy yourself. Either way, I will have more games for you as soon as I'm able, which may be next week. So, but if I can post sooner, I will. So thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.